Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this event at the Center for Geopolitics. When Emmanuel and I first talked about hosting this event, we thought it would be a brilliant moment to discuss a really important book. I don't think we were quite aware of how important the subject may get over the 2 or 3 months in between us last talking and the event itself. But there really could not be a more significant moment to discuss a book called Discussing Pax Germanica, The Rise and Limits of German Hegemony in European Integration. I must only begin by recommending the volume itself, which contains a number of chapters from a wide range of leading experts on European integration, as well as a testimony of experience from Herman van Rompuy that is really worth reading as well. What we have here are 3 of the leading authors of different chapters who are going to speak about the book, about the project, and then the 5 of us here will have a conversation, and then we'll open things up to audience questions. So just to go through our speakers today, we have Emmanuel Comte, who is a fellow at the University of Cyprus and a professorial lecturer at the Vienna School of International Studies. As well as editing this volume, he's the author of The History of the European Migration Regime from Routledge in 2018. We also have Fernando Guirao, who is the Jean Monnet Professor of History and Economic History Professor. I don't know which one you prefer to put first, at the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, and Deputy Director of the Barcelona Center for European Studies. Caroline de Groote is somewhere and is trying to get in, and she'll be speaking third, so we hope to hear from her later on. She's currently the European correspondent for the Dutch newspaper NRC, as well as a columnist for foreign policy and a member of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Finally, joining us for the discussion is Herman van Rompuy, who was Prime Minister of Belgium from 2008 to 2009 and the first permanent president of the European Council from 2009 to 2014. He played a crucial role in navigating the complex relationships between EU member states, including between France and Germany, which features a lot in the book and in his own chapter of it. And so we're delighted to have you with us today. All right, I don't want to speak too much about the book. Right now, I will leave that to the authors, and then we'll come back in for questions later on. But Emmanuel, over to you.
Right. Thank you very much, Hugo, and the Center for Geopolitics for hosting this event. We are very honored to present this book to you and your audience. So let me share some slides. So this volume is fairly recent. Can you see the slides? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So I will make a short overview of the volume. So this volume is meant to discuss the role of Germany in European integration. And we gathered a number of scholars and one prominent policymaker to discuss this question: what has been the role of Germany in European integration? There are a variety of views that are expressed in the book about this matter, but they fall quite neatly into 4 categories that represent the 4 parts of the book. So the first group of contributions highlights the longue durée of German influence over European affairs and highlight parallels between German history and the modern European Union. They also highlight the continuities across centuries and how German and European history have been intertwined for the last millennium. A second group of contributions is more focused on the history of European integration, and they highlight the prominent role Germany has played. My own chapter makes the argument for the sources and effects of German hegemony on European integration. That's my argument. That is, you cannot understand European integration if you don't place Germany at the center. Germany had the primary predicament to create the European Union as we know it, and it had the resources to do that. And the key characteristics of the European Union as it exists today, namely the common market, the European focus, and the multi-layered system of sovereignty have all emerged through Germany's wielding power and in accordance with Germany's political tradition. We have in the middle of this volume the testimony of Mr. Van Rompuy, who honors us by his presence today. His experience during the Mercosi's, the Eurozone crisis, and a variety of crises during his tenure as the first permanent president of the European Council. With part 3, we enter with a group of contributors that highlight some of the limitations of German influence over European affairs in military matters, at the end of the Cold War, and in monetary affairs as well, especially recently. Fernando Guirao will talk more about his own contribution. Last, we have contributions that are focused on the most recent developments, including energy policy questions, the aftermath of the Eurozone crisis, the COVID pandemic, the Ukraine war. These contributions tend to present Germany in a declining role in European integration. So that's a discussion. I encourage everybody in the audience to get the book, read the book, to understand the various facets of German influence in European integration. So we have some news to share today. The book is available with Routledge as a hard copy and as an ebook, and now it's also available as an audiobook. You can get the audiobook by going to my website, Emmanuel, conte.eu, and you will easily navigate to the audiobook, which is read by a very warm and articulate British voice. So I recommend the experience. And personally, I also propose a course online on Pax Germanica for anybody who is interested. The deadline to enroll is on the 18th of August, also on my website. So once again, thank you to the organizers for inviting us, and for the audience to be following us today.
Thank you. Fernando, do you want to speak to both the project as a whole and your own chapter in particular?
Well, I'm gonna have 5 minutes. I'm gonna try to present to you why the book, I think, is interest to the reader as of today. I would like to present, to basically to link my views to the comment you made at the very beginning, why now is so relevant, this book. Okay, before I do that, please, Hugo, let me just thank you for organizing this event, to the Center for Geopolitics of University of Cambridge for holding the event, to all the audience for being here, Monsieur Van Rompuy for his presence. Thank you very much. I'm speaking to you from Barcelona. This is my office room, and today is a cloudy afternoon, so I feel like being in Cambridge as of I'm talking. All right. Now we are here to discuss about Pax Germanica, discussing Pax Germanica. Emmanuel has introduced you. The project has introduced you the different sectors, the different sections in the book. Let me just try to address why I think is relevant as of today. All right. I would say there are 4 reasons making this book relevant. The first one is because, as Hugo just mentioned at the very beginning, the book is really addressing a central core issue of atemporal importance. Is Germany and its relative importance to continental Europe, to the rest of Europe. Second, because the book addresses the rise and limits of Germany in Europe from various sort of aspects, disciplines, scholarly traditions. That means that the book is not, let's say, is not dogmatic. Okay, obviously there is a point of departure, which is basically Germany has always mattered. That's the point of departure. Everybody knows that. Now the question is, how much does it matter? How much has it matter? To what extent the European Union is due to some sort of German influence in all across the history. Now, the book is going to present you facts, is going to present you arguments, is going to present facts and arguments for and against, the position of the thesis of German hegemony in Europe. And it is up to the readers to make up their own interpretation on the basis of the facts and the arguments presented in this book. The third element is that these arguments, or these facts, these arguments, which are deployed in the book, they have been elaborated by a set of scholars with high reputation and long experience in doing research in this matter. Therefore, here what we have, and that's something, this book has something which is special. What we have is this whole team of highly reputed, well-known scholars, all of them addressing exactly the same topic from complete different perspectives, from complete different research experiences. And they are addressing, and all of them have to address the topic of German hegemony, whether they will have to define it, they will have to just position themselves concerning that issue. That is extremely interesting. Now, the last reason why this book is relevant as of today is essentially because the recent turbulences, which we are attending on every single day, have made the contents of this book to be relevant for you to understand basically the scale and scope of the changes. Let me just, for instance, war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine challenged the post-Cold War order from which the present-day Federal Republic of Germany emerged. Here, what we have is excellent chapters by Gross, Palmer and Patterson, Shield, and also the testimony by Monsieur Herman Van Rompuy on this issue. As a matter of fact, if you read these chapters, that will be the best guide you will find to understand properly some of the contents of Angela Merkel's memoirs, Freedom. Okay, you will get much more kind of context to try to understand some of the logics that Angela Merkel is deploying in the chapters concerning the post-Cold War period. Also, what we have is the principles underlying the international order since 1945, that they are being challenged on every single tweet by Donald Trump. But you have to understand that it was in this order, let's say, let me just use Pax Americana, in which the Federal Republic of Germany emerged, was born and developed. And you have excellent chapters by Charles Mayer, Lord Spohr, myself, dealing with basically how the German economy, how Germany was able to maximize its position in this period of before the end of the collapse of real socialism in Eastern Europe. Then what we have now is this increasing war economy talk, this increasing war economy kind of atmosphere, in which what we have again is a recalibrating the relationship between France and Germany. And you have two excellent chapters dealing with that, one by Leibniz, Lord, and also Herman Van Rompuy, which is dealing with this troubled relationship between France and Germany. Also, what we have now is these new dynamics of this new digital economy, decarbonization, all these demographic dynamics that are challenging the former growth model of Germany. What we have is a very recent book just published, this Caput, in which what we have is the declaring that Germany is again let's say a sick man of Europe. We have had that many times before. They have proven not to be accurate. In this book, you will find some of these special features, which are long-term features in economic and political dynamics, explaining the resilience of Germany in just moving forward. Or also what you have, particularly the chapter by or the testimony by Herman Van Rompuy, but you have is one element which is really extremely relevant, is this capacity of the main political parties in Germany to make these big coalitions, which basically mean that Germany is subject to less turbulences, political turbulences, than most of German neighbors. There is a lot to talk. But I had only 5 minutes to start with, so I pass the floor to Ugo, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. We're going to get into a Q&A on the book soon. But first of all, Caroline is in Warsaw at the moment, and the Wi-Fi is proving unfortunately temperamental. However, we have a plan. which is that she's going to speak through the phone and then through someone else at the Center for Geopolitics and then talk. Now, is this going to work? We're at bated breath here, ladies and gentlemen. Caroline, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. The question.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us.
And I'm really sorry for all this mess in the 5-star hotel. But anyway.
Over to you.
So I will discuss my chapter a little bit, which, funnily enough, is totally not about Germany, at least not directly. The chapter I've written is a comparison between the European Union and the Habsburg Empire. So it's not directly about Germany, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. I've lived in Brussels and I've lived in Vienna. And, sometimes you need to move around a bit to see all kinds of parallels that otherwise you would not have seen. But while living in Vienna, I discovered a lot about the Habsburg Empire I never knew anything about, and noticed that both are actually multinational empires working more or less the same way, functioning the same way. They were both, and I focused mostly on the last 100 years of the Habsburg Empire, both avoiding war to the utmost, both trying to shoot with words, not with ammunition, both focused on compromise, both total navel gazers, both are internal projects, both totally insecure about themselves. You would always hear the Habsburg emperor say, just like many, many European officials in Brussels, we will probably screw up this time as well. We won't manage. Always think you are very weak while others perceive you as rather strong. And also militarily very weak, especially given the fact that both are or were, one in past tense and one in the present, surrounded by, let's call them very assertive, sometimes aggressive rivals. And somehow they managed to massage themselves through it's very slow, messy, and complicated decision making. But so in a way, the complaints that Europeans always have about the EU, that it is slow and nobody understands it, and it's always divided. People in the Habsburg Empire had exactly the same complaint about Vienna. And I remind you, the empire in all kinds of forms and shapes lasted for 600 years. Now, finally, to Germany. Germany has some of the same experience, of course, through also the Holy Roman Empire, which was run, not more than that, but distinctly run by the Habsburg family for a while. And this federal experience of everybody having a say and everybody flying in from different directions is still there. And in Europe, I think we notice it today. In Germany, decision-making also takes a lot of time. In Germany, they are always aware that, some of the Länder have different opinions and different interests. And politics is made in Germany less top-down, I think, than in a country like France because of that. Germany, in its essence, like an empire, has a compromised culture. So voila, this is how my comparison, which has nothing to do with Germany, ended up in a book about Germany.
Thank you. I'm conscious that this system is working brilliantly, but it may break down at some moment. So I want to address my first question to you, Caroline, which is when you're thinking about this, and when I was reading your chapter, what struck me is that you argue that it was not nationalism and competing nationalisms that proved such an undoing to the Habsburg structure, but rather the pressure of conflict, the geopolitical pressure existing on it. When we think about the comparison you're making, how do you feel those two forces, in other words, external pressure and nationalist pressures from below, are challenging EU structures now within the context of that comparison?
Look, I think this comparison, concretely what ended the Habsburg Empire is not nationalism, it's the First World War, the Great War, as the British call it, I believe. In the beginning of the war in 1914, actually, in all the corners of the empire, people were lining up to join the army, to defend the Kaiser. But after a while, the war went very badly for them. Political reforms were stopped because all the noses had to be in the same direction. There were food shortages. In short, the state could not provide any added value to people anymore. They didn't get their salaries. They couldn't demonstrate any longer. And so it slowly evaporated. And so if you look at the EU now, with war at its doorstep, I think it is very important to realize that it's dangerous. War is very dangerous, and as Otto von Habsburg, the son of the last emperor, who was an MEP, as we all know, and a very convinced one, because he believed that the EU was a sort of a modern continuation of the Habsburg Empire. But he always said multinational entities can not wage offensive wars. And this is what the Habsburg Empire was doing, because they declared war on Serbia, and then everybody else, all the other powers in Europe jumped in, and they lost the plot and the war too, and the empire in the end. The EU is not attacking anyone. Luckily, that kind of empire, the days of those kind of superpower empires are over on the continent. So, but we are trying to defend ourselves if it becomes necessary. And so Otto von Habsburg said, a multinational entity cannot wage an offensive war, but at best it could manage a defensive one. But I think we have to be careful with this war, because you need all the noses in one direction, and this is very difficult in a multinational empire. Let's call Europe an empire.
And that suggests and sort of takes one to another thesis that is as old as Monnet's own vision of integration, which is consent by delivery. And the whole concept that just by doing stuff and achieving outcomes, you will sustain consent for the European project.
Yeah.
For Germany, that's long been difficult, partly because of the monetary side of things, and partly because the benefits of market integration have come with negotiation. But I was wondering, Fernando, whether you could speak to the sort of Germany's relationship to that idea of Europe delivering through market integration, and how Germany has viewed that, maybe ahead of a French interpretation. Emmanuel, do you want to come in, and then we'll go back to Fernando?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on two things that Caroline has said. I think Caroline's chapter is one of the top chapters of the book, and I would be tempted to say that if you are to remember only one chapter, it should be that one, because it combines a bit of everything inside the book. So Caroline said it's a book chapter that is totally not about Germany, which is quite interesting, because as she mentioned, the Habsburg Empire used to be the backbone of Germany for centuries. And somehow the connection between the two got lost. So what is really important in that chapter is to understand how this political entity has so many parallels with the European Union, and it make the point of the strong influence of Germany in European integration. The second thing that is crucial in what Caroline has said is that the First World War destroyed the Habsburg Empire. And Caroline has just said the situation today is extremely dangerous. And rereading her contribution before this seminar, I could not prevent myself as well from making this parallel again. That is, what she shows in her chapter is that the Habsburg were not going to war. But there was one exception to this rule, and that was the First World War. And that exception confirmed the rule that when the Habsburg Empire wanted to wage an offensive war, they eventually led to the end of their empire. That's why the situation today is so dangerous, and the European Union should not consider itself what it is not, and should really understand what it is.
Fernando, you're still not audible to me, I'm afraid. Perhaps.
Yeah, continuing on that point, that is,
yeah,
there is a risk if the EU wants to go to a very offensive relationship with Russia, that it cannot stand this kind of offensive behavior, exactly like the Habsburg Empire could not stand an offensive behavior against Russia, by the way, again, even though Russia was not crucial in the eventual demise of the Habsburg Empire.
I think this raises something, and Caroline Herman to come into, which is where we're going now in terms of the European relationship to defense spending, which has been very much in the news at the moment. And the question becomes, under what structure is that set up? And that brings together two debates that have previously been quite distinct about EU foreign policy and where that goes, and as well as the old problems about monetary integration, spending, where Germany's taken a very clear position. And Caroline, I don't know whether you have views on how those two things coming together can be managed, but it strikes me that this is very much a new phase in an old conversation.
Yes, it is a new phase. I think we are slowly, and people are not really aware of this, I think. I think the EU is changing very, very rapidly at the moment. The EU was all about depoliticizing issues. There was too much politics in Europe, and we had 2 world wars, so we started to break political problems into little technical bits. You know, discussions about fishing quota, chemical directives, and everything. Now politics is back, because we have been so good at you know, the EU is not perfect. That's precisely why it still exists. But we have been, what has been a great success, of course, is had no more war. And this was the foundation of everything. Plus jamais ça. But we've become so good at not waging war that we don't, in a way, like the Habsburgs, we don't recognize it anymore. You know, we didn't really know what to do with Russia's invasions in neighboring states, for instance. We couldn't believe we had 200,000 people at the border with Ukraine, and we still believed Mr. Putin on his blue eyes. You know, we couldn't believe he would do it. But okay, so I think this brings us to a completely different Europe, because this threat from the outside comes at a moment when we are at our lowest defense spending, more or less. Okay, now it's going up, but the invasion came at the lowest moment, and nobody knows how serious the American commitment still is to have us under its security umbrella. And so everything in Brussels 10 years ago was about money, during the Greek crisis, for instance. Now everything is about security. Security is not a European competence. You know, it's purely government. Governments have never wanted to make this European, so they are totally flexible. And those countries who don't want to join in with European defense, bits and pieces, okay, fine, they stay outside. You know, not everybody is a member of the Eurozone, not everybody is a member of Schengen. And it also enables us to have the UK with us, and also the Norwegians, who are very eager to join in. Nobody knows what the Swiss will do, but maybe one day they want to be part of this too. Everything is possible. And what strikes me, the Dutch Parliament has decided 2 days ago that they are against Eurobonds used for defense spending. You know, 10 years ago, this would have been a huge news in Europe. This time, you know, everybody thinks, okay, if the Dutch don't want to join, like the Hungarians, let them sulk in their little corner. We move on. There was nothing about it in the Financial Times. There was nothing about it in Politico, in the main political outlets that dominate, like it or not, Brussels. It's very interesting. Things are totally flexible. This is really a different Europe.
Monsieur Van Rooij. Your hand is raised. The floor is yours.
Okay. Of course, I'm tempted to comment on what is already said, but in some way, it's a totally different Europe. There's also a totally different Germany, because the main topic of this conversation is the role of Germany. And one of the reasons is that one of the reasons of this so-called decline of the role of Germany, a lesser important role than in previous times, is that they made mistakes. They made mistakes in foreign policy. Don't forget that we had to stop, even after the Russian invasion, the continuation of the building of this Nord Stream 2. Everybody was warning, many were warning against this this big dependency on Russian oil and Russian gas, and they continued. Nevertheless, they had to stop after the Russian invasion, but it was with a lot of hesitation, and they started Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, even after the annexation of Crimea. So this policy proved wrong. They believed Putin, they tried to convince Putin, and at the end, Putin invaded Ukraine. The second is the balanced budget. Germany imposed balanced budgets on all European countries, so to speak. I'm now making caricature, but to make myself clear, I use that caricature. And now they are trying to amend their own constitution so that that break will not be applicable, not for other countries, but not even for Germany. And we saw that this fetish, this obsession about balanced budget created less investment in infrastructure and ICT. Germany is lagging in all this. And of course, it was a handicap for much more military spending. That was the second mistake. It was they imposed on others their budgetary concepts, budgetary orthodoxy. The third one was too much dependency on China, especially for the automotive industry. And they thought we have the best cars in the world, and now they are almost outcompeted on the Chinese market by the Chinese, and even on the European market until recently by Tesla. So the mistakes made in policies created this lesser important role of Germany in the European Union. Does that mean that that Germany will not play in the future an important role? No, and the mistake that we should not make is to look at something that is temporary, incidental, cyclical, and then in order to appear more intelligent than others, say this is structural. I'm not convinced. There can be a new Wirtschaftswunder, a new economic miracle, and so on. They can change. And even at the end of the Merkel period, she changed. Don't forget that she launched with Macron this recovery fund. Actually, it were Eurobonds. Eurobonds were a forbidden word in the Eurozone crisis. And all of a sudden, for 500 billion, they created that fund. Even now, the new chancellor, the chancellor that can enter into office in a few weeks' time, hopefully, is pleading already now that we have to seek for other kinds of funding for military spending at the European level. So they can change. They are more flexible, but they are now victim of mistakes that were made in the recent past, so to speak. But that does not mean that the role of Germany is out forever. It's a handicap. It's a handicap because at the same time we have a weak France with a minority government. Macron tried to play a bigger role of it, but politically he's running an unstable, not running at all, an unstable France. So with a weak Germany and a weak France, there's really a handicap for the European Union. We are lucky that the Commission in some way is filling the gap. And there's a big chance also for the Commission, and she sees that opportunity, Ursula von der Leyen, in the absence of the Franco-German motor, that the Commission can play a bigger role. But the Commission can make proposals. At the end of the day, it is the European Council that decides. La Commission propose, le Conseil européen dispose, and they have to bear that also in mind. This is also an occasion, that's my last remark, for my successor Antonio Costa to play an important role in the European Union, because he is chairing the European Council without a pre-cooked Franco-German agreement. I had to live with that also in the second part of my mandate, but from the start on, he has to live with this vacuum of power. So the president of the European Council has to bring the 27 together without this, I repeat, without these pre-cooked agreements that we used to have for a long time in the history of European decision making. So the institutions have to play a bigger role, but it could also be that that Germany, after a while, will become politically more stable and might make the sufficient economic reforms, as Chancellor Schröder did in the beginning of the century, and making the German economy much stronger than it is today. But again, they have to correct mistakes that they made in the recent past.
I think it's fascinating. When I was reading your testimony, one of the things that really stood out to me, which I never really internalized before, was you write that politically, Belgium in its attitude towards Europe was closer to Germany than France, historically, since it looked to a community model rather than an intergovernmental one. That debate sort of lurks in the background a lot in the fiscal debate of the last 30 years. I was wondering, and this is really for anyone in the panel, how people imagine that debate coming back as we have these conversations about defense spending and a greater role for European debt in the new Europe that we're facing.
You're asking me, or
anyone can come in, but
yeah.
I'd love to hear your own thoughts.
I have spoken already, so I will wait for the next other ones.
All right, perhaps Fernando. And you're still not here. What?
Fernando, remove your headphones, Fernando. Unplug them and try to
maybe if you unplug those, that'll solve things.
because obviously.
Didn't change anything.
Yeah, yes, it works.
There we go.
Now.
You're back with us.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about that.
Not at all.
There was a lot of things that I wanted to say before. The question is basically how we are going to change all these budgetary constraints. Is that your question?
Yes, but also, how the intergovernmental as opposed to commission community-led debate will play out in that context.
Well, we're going to, things that are going on now here, what we have is a much more complementarity between the let's say the common approach, the communitarian approach, and the intergovernmental approach. What they are doing basically is, for instance, for all these program of defense, what they are doing is basically what they say they are offering the governments basically to have a much larger public deficit and public debt in order to finance for that. They're at the same time talking about this sort of Eurobonds, although there's a lot of hesitation, there's a lot of opposition, is there on the table. They're talking about new sort of financial sort of instruments in order to channel all these savings into strategic sort of investments. They're also trying to use part of the budget or the common budget in order to address it basically for all these priority sort of investments. What we have now is a much more flexible sort of attitude from the Commission. And at the same time, that is basically going along with this forthcoming attitude of governments, basically because they are basically now willing to do their part, the whole thing. Initially, but we have had for many years had been basically resistance, national resistance. Now what we have is basically we have some sort of alignment. Everybody has understood that we need to change. Now what we have is the let's say the best opportunity basically to change many things, to try to avoid the mistakes we made in the past, try to get new policies, try to get new areas of, let's say, common action, try to get all these people around us, like the United Kingdom, Norway, Switzerland, all these guys, try to get them a little bit more better associated as equals in these future tasks. We have new opportunities. And this is fascinating. This is the good thing about crisis. I mean, everybody is speaking basically that on a negative tune. I'm very optimistic because without Donald Trump, and it's Donald Trump, it's not Vladimir Putin. It's not Vladimir Putin has been there for 3 years. And we have not really changed. It is Donald Trump that has made all of us to get out of the chair and say, we need to change things. We have an opportunity basically to rethink some of the things that we were doing. And here what we have is politics, but at the same time, I think we have to start considering that the European integration has to deliver it. We have to deliver it. We have to do it better because we have not only this security issue, we have many other fundamental challenges that we need to address. We have this is basically the Draghi report, the letter report. They're not talking only about defense. I mean, defense is part of the whole thing. It was there before Donald Trump. It was there basically after February 2022. But we have many other challenges. We cannot only talk about defense because defense, without increasing productivity, without increased social cohesion, without many other things, will not really deliver. So we need to get a much more comprehensive approach to all the challenges that we are facing, because they're not going to go away. I mean, demographics are not going to go away. Decarbonization is not going to go away. I mean, all these elements are not going to go away because of the war. They're there. They're structural. We need to address them at the same time as we are addressing this vital issue of defense.
Caroline, I wonder if you could come in on this, particularly in the context of partnership with the UK, which obviously outside the European Union is looking to build and sustain relationships in the defense space. We have had this week a debate as to whether British firms are going to be within the common European spending. There appears to be a European position and a French position. But I was wondering if you could talk to how the UK post-Brexit, and particularly given Germany's increasing role in some of these debates, is going to be able to fit back into these structures.
I think, look, let me, if I can if I can first say something about this, because I completely agree with Fernando that there used to be a big distinction between the intergovernmental way of doing things in Europe versus the communitarian way, the European way. Now it is really whatever works. And it is very interesting to see that in many, yes, whatever works.
Yeah.
And in many countries, the story was always, we give sovereignty, national sovereignty to Brussels, so we lose something. This is a world in which even those national leaders realize that you give something to Brussels, but you get a lot of sovereignty back as well from Brussels. So the member states are becoming much more dominant. These are also we're not talking about, we're still talking about fishing quota and all that, but now we're talking about defense, about health, about climate, huge issues that nobody can solve on their own. So they get much more active in Brussels, and they are tasking the Commission more than ever. I mean, most of the people I know who work in the Commission, even on Saturday evening, they cancel dinners because they're still in the office, because Madame von der Leyen needs a report by Sunday morning. It's just, so what you see now is that the Commission is getting more important, but the member states are also getting more important. So this whole story about, I give national sovereignty to Brussels, so I become weaker and the Commission becomes stronger. It just doesn't hold anymore. Both the Council and the Commission are becoming more powerful, and I really like it this way, because nobody is very orthodox about it. The only loser here is, and it should be said, is the European Parliament. They are completely bypassed in all these new issues. Now the UK, and not just the UK. I think because we are moving into a new kind of Europe, a totally flexible, hands-on, whatever works kind of Europe, a can-do superpower. We need the UK we cannot just give them free access to the market, and we've seen why. It doesn't work. Nobody wants to do that anymore. But in the field of defense, where again there is no Europe, we are totally free to work with outside partners. And since we need the UK and the UK needs us, this is fine. This is fine, and the UK can even be part of the Eurobond program, and so British defense industries, but also Norwegians, and here come the Swiss as well, I think, because otherwise they will lose out, and they don't like that financially. They can be part of the program too, so the money can be spent on weapons factories in the United Kingdom, which have always followed market rules in the EU, because that was anyway the most important market. So it's easy to do it, and we are in new territories, and the situation is serious. So it's happening. So there's a lot of talk about fragmentation in Europe and the rise of the far right and all this kind of thing. But I see a lot of cohesion as well. Look at the whole north of Europe, which is suddenly very European. They were there for the market, basically, Sweden and Denmark in any case. And so the Danes are now advocating the use of Eurobonds, for instance. These are huge changes, huh? The Finns have always understood this. They participate in every bit of European integration, because for them, everything is a security issue, always has been. But the rest of the North is now waking up to that as well. And they take Norway along.
I want to get to audience questions soon, but Herman and then Fernando, perhaps you could come in.
Yeah, I wanted to just build up on the argument that Caroline was doing now. Basically, having new opportunities to reestablish or to, let's say, establish new relations with the outside world. We were talking about the United Kingdom. I mean, all this defense cooperation can serve to rebuild confidence and mutual trust. And that would be a big step forward in order to think about future relations between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Think about, for instance, Latin America, or the idea that with Latin America, the European Union can offer to Latin America, let's say, a much more, let's say, guarantee of stability that Donald Trump has, just blown up. Concerning the BRICS, maybe we could just offer them a reform of the international economic governance in a much more inclusive manner. We have now a huge range of opportunities to rethink the way we do things, whether internally in Europe and also between Europe and the rest of the world. And we should take advantage of this opportunity. I think this is, for me, this is the moment.
Mr. Van Rompuy.
Yeah, we are in some way with the back against the wall, the abyss in front of us, and the knife to the throat. And in that kind of situation, you have to drop taboos, to avoid ideological discussions. First things first. And Ukraine is the big issue on the short term, but how long the short term will last, I don't know. This is not, in that, Fernando, that I want to amend what you said a few 10 or 15 minutes ago. We are not attacking Russia. This is not an offensive war of the European Union. This is a defensive war. We have not chosen for that kind of war. And so we defend Ukraine, and by defending Ukraine, we are preserving our own values and our own security. So with this, we have no other choice than to support Ukraine and to bring peace, but as the expression of these days is a fair peace and a lasting peace. But in any case, we are now in the Europe of necessity. It is not the right time to discuss about intergovernmentalism or the community method. First things first, and what is needed, we'll do it. And the paradox is that 27 member states of 26 member states in an intergovernmental body as the European Council can decide on Eurobonds for defense or for industry, which is a really community competence. So this is, even in my time in the Eurozone crisis, I hated that kind of discussions. So we have to do what we have to do, and in these times, taboos has to be dropped. So now it's the primacy of politics. I fully agree with Caroline. Politics is back. The primacy of security. The budget is, I know what, I'm a former minister of the budget, and I was successful as minister of the budget, but this is not the big issue today. By the way, in the United States, the budget deficit is the double of the deficit of the Eurozone. You know what their level of public debt is? 123%. The level of debt in the Eurozone is 87%. So in many countries, the focus is not on the budget. We have to look at the sustainability. I fully agree with all this, but we have to be creative also in this matter. And that's why European funding for infrastructure, for military spending, for competitiveness is unavoidable. If we put again the brakes on it, and we try to have a competitive economy and to have a stronger army and to work for climate change, all this in a very strict budgetary framework, it will not work. It will not work at all. So I don't underestimate it. What in the longer run, or the consequences could be, but this is now the priority is elsewhere than having a balanced budget or a budget that is growing beyond the 3%. So what I'm saying sounds a little bit dangerous and adventurous. Of course, you have to respect certain limits and all. But when I look to the Americans, they have not that kind of constraint. Of course, they have the dollar, right? But and with the dollar, they can do everything. Even the Chinese, they are launching stimulus programs, the one after the other, one after the other. So we should not be more Catholic than the Pope. And we are in an existential crisis, economically speaking, military speaking, and we have internal enemies. Internal enemies. Until now, we could manage the rise of populism, but the day that the populists would be in power in France after the presidential elections, I hope that it will not happen. Then it will become clear that we have also this internal problem. Now we managed to have a majority of 26 out of 27, which is absolutely great. But can we have that also in the near future? We'll see. But in any case, what my message is, we have to be flexible, also with the UK and with other partners. Of course, we can work with them, and we have to work with them. I think it will not be a problem of the European Union. It will be a problem in the UK. There they have to take the decision to come closer to Europe again, and it will not stop with the military only. They have to solve that problem. I think there is a lot of openness inside the European Union for working with the UK on that crucial issue of defense and a common position on Ukraine.
Fantastic. I want to get into questions now. And so people, please use the Q&A function to just send questions in. And starting with a question from Brendan, who also contributes to this volume, Professor Brendan Sims, to Emmanuel, which is, do you think Germany's relationship historically with Europe has been more defined by demography or geopolitics? And what is your expectation for the future? And you're on mute. I just give you an advance warning.
So the question is whether the relationship of Germany with Europe has been more defined by demography or by geopolitics. The whole question is also, what is Germany? This was the starting point in Caroline's discussion earlier. So what is Germany? And what is interesting is that I don't think we can understand German history if we don't consider that the Germans consider themselves not as a separate unit, but have to roam the rest of the continent. They must be roaming the rest of the continent. Germany cannot exist otherwise. So either towards Central and Eastern Europe or towards the South or the West, this is a big constant in German history, something perhaps we could have better emphasized in the book. And geopolitics came after in the form of aggressive states at the periphery of German lands that led Germany into a centralization of power. So both factors are important. I think the Germans are better off when their relationship with Europe is defined by demography than by geopolitics. But to continue along that thread as well, I think this book is important not just because Germany is an important player in Europe, in the European Union, but also because many of us make the argument that many of the structures of the European Union are very influenced by German history. And so I recommend to the public to read the book in order to make up their own mind on what is the true nature of the European Union, because we can say many things about the European Union, but at some point histories take its rights back. And I don't think the EU can evolve into whatever it wants, whenever it wants. That is, if we understand well the history of the European Union and the history of the continent, we understand that the room of maneuver may be limited. And about the debate we are talking about, there are so many parallels with European history. An aggressive neighbor at Europe's borders that leads into some form of centralization. This is the whole story of the continent, the whole story of the continent. And we were talking about a recent vote in the Dutch parliament. Caroline mentioned it earlier. The Dutch were the first to leave the empire precisely at the time of centralization efforts in the context of aggressive neighbors. So the risk of the EU falling apart is real. So to read the book, to make up your mind on these debates.
Thank you. So please do send questions in to the chat. I suppose it's incumbent on me as chair to push back a little bit on some of the arguments that I've heard over the last 40 minutes. And I might do it by saying this. We've just had news today that the Trump administration has closed General License 8, which was one of the aspects of US sanctions that facilitated continued payments in dollars for access to oil. This is, a really significant news that has actually tightened the economic pressure on Germany. When we look at on Russia, when we look at EU economic statecraft and EU sanctions, we find a picture that is decidedly mixed, both in terms of transshipment, a lot of it coming from Germany via third countries to Russia, in terms of the shadow fleet, much of which was, we are now increasingly learning, in origin Greek, and of course, in terms of Russian central bank assets, which are still a subject of vehement debate and have not been seized. So my question to the whole panel is, in order to have this new Europe, does there need to be a tightening and hardening of economic statecraft? And is that tightening and hardening possible in the context of the decision-making processes we now have? Maybe Caroline to make a start.
Yeah, I think this is a good question. What the Americans are doing is, when they issue sanctions, they can really enforce them. First, by bullying all kinds of countries to obey, to comply. But second, also because the dollar is the world's largest reserve currency, and everybody who is remotely not complying or related to somebody or a company not complying is immediately cut off. And so Europe doesn't do this. And actually, I think we should really think about it and make the euro stronger, so that we can, first of all, defend ourselves against this extraterritorial behavior. But second, if the Americans do it, if the Chinese are doing it, they're doing it too sometimes, maybe we should consider doing this too. So yes, and we can do this. We don't need all kinds of European procedures for that. It's a matter of political will, and I think the political will is rather there at the moment.
Anyone else like to comment?
Yeah, I can comment if you want. I think that the whole debate we have in the book, that is the European Union is always on a very narrow path, and this is what this book tries to show. That is, any attempt at further centralization could lead to further centrifugal forces taking on.
All right, so we have a question here from Dr. Trevelyan Wing, who is one of our postdocs, who writes that Friedrich Merz seems to be moving in the right direction in terms of recent pronouncements, but will, yes, now the grand coalition of Christian and Social Democrats really be able to push through the necessary changes required in Germany, particularly when it comes to defense? And I think this gets back to something, Caroline, you said earlier about Germany's consensual model of politics. And some of that is reflected in its political system now, but that does present challenges in terms of getting these kinds of radical changes through the political system. So does anybody want to come in on that particular question?
Well, the only thing, I mean, what I could say is that, I mean, you have more chances to get the changes to go through with this coalition government than without the coalition government. And it's clear, I mean, with the two central forces moving in exactly the same direction in a coordinated manner in the Grand Coalition, the probabilities of having these big changes in defense policy are much higher than any other way around. Whether they will be successful or not, we don't know. We simply don't know. I mean, the composition of the Bundestag once is made of the new Bundestag is really complicated. It's really complex. It's really complex, despite of this grand coalition. That's why, for instance, the future chancellor wants to change the rule of the limit of the budget before the new parliament gets in office. So he's in a rush in order to do that, because he knows perfectly well that the present Bundestag is much more favorable to that sort of changes than the incoming parliament.
Mr. Van Rompuy.
Yeah, I listened carefully to what the future German Chancellor is saying. He's saying on defense that you cannot count on the Americans anymore. Mm. And that's for the post-war German history something totally new, totally new. They were much more than others depending on the American protection and American military security guarantees. So if what Trump succeeded is in losing trust among NATO partners, losing trust in the relationship between the EU and the US, losing trust inside the United States. Consumers are not spending anymore, and investors are not investing anymore. So all this rhetoric and all those threats and all those creating chaos, also that has an impact, a big impact on the future of NATO. But if Merz continues in saying this and drawing all the conclusions for Germany of this lack of trust in Article 5 on the solidarity in case of attacks and so on, there is only one conclusion that he can draw, is to build much more not a European army, but having some kind of European defense union, investing more in each member state and investing more at the European level itself. And that for Germany is really a Zeitenwende. That's really a Zeitenwende. Mm-hmm. And that is under the pressure not only of what's happening in Ukraine, that is also related to what is said and what is done in Washington. And the combination of both of them, one is an enemy, Russia. I know that Trump used once the word enemy regarding the European Union, but in any case, you cannot count on the US anymore, and that is his basic message. So that's the reason why he's saying we have to drop this taboo and this taboo, also on the budget, also on other issues, because we are in a totally new situation. Europe is changing, Germany is changing, and because the world is changing.
That leads us as perfectly into Jeff Green's question, which is about what the consequences would be for the EU if Germany itself becomes less Atlanticist. And Karin, I wonder if I could ask you this question, particularly in the context of EU-US relations. We've talked a lot about how that will mean the breaking down of taboos. But in terms of the relationship with the United States, Germany, as traditionally a somewhat Atlanticist power, moving away from that, how do you think that will change EU-US relations over the coming 4 years, leaving aside the fact that relations with the US right now are a movable feast? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear
Fantastic.
me too?
Yeah, brilliant.
Oh, okay, good. I think what is, look, the United States was at the cradle of the European Union. The Americans played a huge role in bringing Europeans finally together, because even after the Second World War, they were still bickering over things. And the Americans smashed some heads together. They even threatened not to pay out Marshall funds if we didn't finally agree. And then they started protecting us. They took care of all our security. The fact that all of this is now being thrown into doubt, and with President Trump saying that he wants to punish the EU, and the EU was set up to screw, even he said this, I think literally, screw the United States. I mean, it couldn't be further from the truth, but anyway. I mean, read the Eisenhower diaries, as I recently did. Amazing. But it tells you that this for Europe, the Pax Americana is over. And somebody said the other day, and I think this is very, very true, instead we get the Tax Americana. We get all the tariffs and we get punished. We get punished into and coerced into submission. In a certain way, the Americans, I don't think they will throw us under the bus. They just want us to be their puppets. So in that sense, the West still exists. It's in a way how Putin deals with the former breakaway republics, trying to force them into submission again. So where does this leave the relationship between the US and the EU? I think we have to put up with this man and his regime. As long as it takes. I admire Friedrich Merz for his, how do they call this, the clairvoyance. He understands this, and he acts accordingly. Look, when France a couple of years ago said we can supply a nuclear umbrella for Europe, the Germans got very scared, and they ran. They bought even more weapons in America, and they made more defense deals with the Americans. These days are over, so this forces the Germans and the French together, and they have to tackle, answer very difficult questions about who controls the nuclear button and all that kind of thing. But they must, and I think they realize it. So yeah, it will happen.
That leads me to the question I want to end on. But first, there's a question from Sean Klein here, which is that given that West Germany has a history and tradition of Atlanticism that East Germany does not, to what extent could the current geopolitical situation cause further division within modern Germany? I do think this point about separate political traditions, particularly regarding Europe, which is something that comes through in the book. And in fact, what is in the book is, and which I never quite understand as much as I should, is the tradition of pro-European politics in Germany, particularly coming from the Catholic center-right, which is a profoundly West German feeling. So, Emmanuel, I wonder whether you could reflect on that old East-West division, and particularly how it will play with a changed relationship with the United States.
Yes, it's clear for German leaders that the costs of US securities are dramatically increasing, not just because of the requirement to spend more on defense that come from Washington, but in a variety of fields, the Americans are getting an increasingly costly partner for European security. The Germans were very attached to that because they could not consider seriously, I believe, the French umbrella in terms of nuclear defense. So the US umbrella was much more compelling than any French umbrella. So I think the EU and the European Union can live without NATO. That's something which is still unknown, because actually the EU and European integration have always occurred during NATO existence. But I don't see why NATO is absolutely necessary, and I don't think the latest episodes have clearly demonstrated it. So so we may evolve towards a more European-centered defense system. That, I think, is perfectly possible, and Germany can certainly be instrumental to that.
Does anyone else want to come in before I go to a last question? So I want to end particularly on this point about the Pax Germanica as the book begins, with by picking up on something that was sort of lurking behind, Herman, some of your own comments, which was this idea of unity in the 26, which I think was a Hungary reference. And you spoke yourself about rising populism in Europe, particularly in France. Orban himself, and actually we have a research at the center, Elvio Tamush, who works on this very well. Orban has an interesting relationship with sort of ideas of French nationalism. He's less opposed than you might think. But we are seeing a rising populism in Germany. It is not as extreme or as serious in its scale as maybe in a Hungary, or even sadly right now in a France. But it does exist. It has done, the AfD has done astonishingly well in the last election. So my closing question is, how long does Germany have to implement its Zeitenwende, its vision of a new Europe? And if it doesn't do it fast enough, what are those implications for the wider European project? Who's going to jump on that landmine first? Fernando, I'll throw it to you first, and then we'll go around.
How long does Germany have to implement a new Europe? Jesus Christ, that's a very good question to end a debate. How long does Germany have to change Europe before we get the barbarians? We open up the gates to the barbarians. That's what you're asking. Jesus, we have no idea. But the sooner we do it, the better. I have no idea, but the sooner we do it, we better. Because for every single election that we have in Europe, we are all the time, all of us, holding the breath to see, they're going to make it, they're going to make it, they're going to get there, they're going to get there. Whether we are in Italy, whether we are in France, whether we are in Germany, whether we are in Spain, all the time we are just holding the breath, thinking that the populists, they're going to get the critical margin to change things in Europe. So the better, the sooner we do it, the better.
Emmanuel?
Yeah, I agree with that. That is, the Europeans need to update their defense organization. I think that the Cold War organization is no longer working beyond the Trump's presidency. Let's be frank. Beyond the Trump presidency, that already started to be increasingly problematic before that. So there is a need for a new security concept for Europe that is tailored to Europe. And that's why also this book is so important, because you need to understand what Europe is in order to design anything. And you cannot superimpose a security concept, a US security concept, or even a national security concept to the EU. You need really to be tailored on what the EU is and what it can achieve in the field of security. So this book can serve also for this reflection, to design a genuinely tailored security concept for Europe.
Caroline?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Yes, yes. I think it would be good if Germany goes fast, and I think this is precisely what Mr. Merz has in mind. I think so far. Let's hope he can implement his plans. I really hope so. Whatever you think of his other plans, I think what his strategic vision so far is right on target, and it pleases me to no end to see that Germans had become extremely pessimistic and fatalistic in the past. Nothing worked and the future was bleak, and suddenly there's a curtain lifting. And I think the same is happening in a way, thanks to the Ukraine, but especially also the Trump shocks, that there's a curtain lifting in all of Europe. Not everybody, but a lot of people are at the moment are seeing some hope again, which is great, especially under these circumstances. Let me leave it there.
Amen. Do you want a last word on the issue in general?
That's by coincidence. I said it on several occasions already this evening. The war in Ukraine is not over. And that is the top priority. I'm not speaking about winning the war, but supporting as long as it takes Ukraine. I'm not convinced that we will have very rapidly a ceasefire or even a lasting peace. So, and you never know with the Americans now. They said, we will share information again, and then we will deliver the weapons, but that can change overnight. That can change, that it can last for a week. So we have a very special responsibility regarding Ukraine, and that's why that we need much more cooperation and integration on the European side in defense, and we are building this. There is a growing consensus. 26 out of 27 is quite an achievement. Don't forget that in Italy, the populists are in power, and they are on board with this issue. It used to be that Italy was more cozying Russia and not only the populists but also others before this government. That changed dramatically. So we are with 26 in trying to pursue a stronger European defense. I personally, NATO is in big danger, but it is not our responsibility to blow up NATO. It's our responsibility to make Europe stronger within NATO, or if NATO disappears, without NATO. So, but that is our main task. I'm not reflecting on the future of NATO because that is not in our hands. It's not in our hands. I'm reflecting on how can we make Europe more autonomous, more sovereign, and more secure. And that's our really obligation. And there is the pressure that is now coming from the West and from the East makes this much more possible than in the past. So in some way, I'm optimistic, although using that kind of word in the current climate of chaos and insecurity, that sounds a little bit weird and at least very strange. But we have now a very special responsibility. And again, security is now on top of the agenda. We know that we have issues on competitiveness. We know that we have issues still on climate change and so on. But here, first things first.
I've learned a huge amount. This has been a fascinating conversation. All that's left for me to do is thank 4 outstanding panelists. Join the general chorus urging people to go to the book and read and discover a lot of very strikingly thought-provoking chapters. And to thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.